You are now entering PaleoRadio.
Welcome to PaleoRadio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Thank you for joining us live here in studio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM for PaleoRadio. My name is Joe Elder.
I'm Thor's Hammer, Jeremiah Bannister.
Thor's Hammer.
Thor's Hammer.
That's
I'm
an
the
elegant
Mjolnir.
one.
Yes.
I dig that one. I like it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Welcome to the show, guys. This is a weekly program that we do every single day here live for you guys.
On Mondays.
On Mondays. Every single Monday. We love you for it, and you love us for it. But yes, thank you for joining us. We're going to be covering a range of topics that are going to include some rock, some roll, some politics, some just funny stuff, maybe a little bit of Grammys. Who knows what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, kind of all over the map a little bit. You know, we were behind the scenes last week when we were organizing our thoughts and thinking about what we were talking about. You said something, and I thought, it really hit me, and I kind of reflected on it, on how the method that we use when we choose topics, that you choose some, I choose some, we come together, we make notes, we come together for the show, and bada boom, bada bing, it's great. But since the election, and even before, it seems like it's just increasingly gotten to be more focused just on Donald Trump.
Yes.
And that somehow, and I remember my first thought when I remember you asked, you said, do all of these topics have something to do with Donald Trump? And I thought about it, and I said, in an interesting way, Donald Trump has made his way into almost every important conversation and debate that we're having right now.
Well, he's framing them for sure.
Yeah, he's framing them. So when we talk about something like religious liberty, well, guess what? Guess whose name is going to be in it? If we talk about LGBT issues, or we talk about war, or we talk about any of these things, now Donald Trump finds his way into a lot of this. So I don't know. I kept it in the back of my mind throughout the week. And as I was looking through stories, I was like, what are really cool stories that don't necessarily have to do with Donald Trump?
That's right.
And they don't even really require you say a whole lot about the guy.
And we're going to have enough news on Donald Trump. And, And, let's be honest. And I know we're talking about him right now, but this is the point. There's a cycle that's going on right now that people need to recognize, which is that he's driving the news, in my opinion, with kind of lunacy. He's driving it via his Twitter feed. And there may be a time where we step back, and the only way to truly do good journalistic news is to pretty much ignore, and I know it's hard to do it, but not have his Twitter feed be the news of the day.
It's just maybe Twitter feeds shouldn't be news of the day, period.
Yes.
Like there's actually some of the stories, like the SNL one. We can just start off with the SNL one. The issue with the Kellyanne Conway sketch that some people on the left and the right, especially on the right, believe went too far. And there's a whole bunch of these Twitter references in there. And you go and you can say, before we even get into this, but you can go to almost any story now. And you can go on Yahoo, you can go on Google, you can go anywhere, Facebook. And you're going to see a bunch of these Twitter shots that say, and this person thought this. And a lot of times the people that they're citing are nobody.
They're just, they're randos.
And they're randos. And what they have to say is super bland. And you're like, how does this actually contribute other than stylistically that you think that the presentation is more engaging with the pictures? Beyond that, what is that?
I think they use it for a visual bite, to be honest.
Yeah.
They just use it as what used to be the emboldened large font portion of some part of their story. They've moved over, and now they put in a little tweet with the picture in there. But the other thing, too, is it's a unique medium that we have where people can contact real well-known celebrities very quickly and allow them to respond back to you. And also, it's a pretty high responsibility to have a Twitter feed and not just go shooting off at the mouth if you have a status like that. If you are a celebrity, you're going to deal with pushback too from anything that you say. So it's kind of a two-way street.
I like that real subtle plug you made for the show on our Twitter feed, talking about celebrities and stuff.
There you go.
Of course, you can follow our amazing, glitzy Twitter feed over at PaleoRadio Show on Twitter. So we encourage you to do that, and you can reach out to us, and you can do that at Gmail, PaleoRadioshow@gmail.com. But, Joe, this SNL thing, we watched the video. Actually, we've got somebody in studio here. He was here for my speech yesterday at Sunday Assembly in Kalamazoo, which was totally awesome, and I might say something later about it. But we were watching this skit, and there's a piece over at the Inquirer of Philadelphia over at Philly.com, says SNL airs dark Kellyanne Conway sketch that went too far for some. Saturday Night Live is enjoying its strongest ratings in 22 years. This is according to Rob Tornome. But that success hasn't come without some controversy, as a sketch in last night's show mocking Trump aide Kellyanne Conway appears to illustrate. Before actually going and talking about it, it's true that SNL has been enjoying a real tidal wave of popularity over the last, year and a half?
Yeah, which is always coincides with election year. Every time. I mean, every 4 years, Saturday Night Live seems to have ratings boosts. They do political satire. So whenever politics is a heavier conversation for most people, they end up getting higher ratings. I mean, that's pretty common.
Is SNL's news program going to have its own show now? I've heard rumor.
I'm not sure.
With
Michael Che and Colin Yost?
Possibly. I'm trying to think. I read something recently, and there was and I could have swore that's what it was, but that they were going to have their own program. I could be wrong.
Weekend Update. There's been people that have kind of argued that shows like The Daily Show or even what John Oliver is doing is a byproduct of the Weekend Update that was going on Saturday Night Live since, I think, the late 60s or early 70s, yeah.
Oh, totally.
Or early 70s.
So SNL, known for its scathing portrayals of politicians on both sides of the aisle, has been criticized by many conservatives, including President Trump himself, for being biased. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, who was mocked again this week by Melissa McCarthy, and hilariously, by the way, has called the show mean. And that kind of goes back to the whole snowflakey thing.
It is.
I'm only using that term because that's what they use. I mean, I'm not to flippantly use this. I'm saying this is a term that they use constantly.
Yeah.
Yet here they are talking about meanies.
It is to say that it's funny that the group that uses those terms are the ones that will say things like, this political satire show is really borderline mean. They're kind of mean to me. And it's just odd that what should be thick skin is really not. I mean, and don't get me wrong, there were some liberals that saw this sketch and didn't really like it either. But I think that it is worth noting that when conservatives take the helm, shows like Saturday Night Live do end up getting brought up as being, have they gone too far? Did they say the wrong thing? Are they skipping from being funny to being mean? That conversation tends to pile up on the right side more than the left.
Oh, yeah. And I think part of it, too, in fairness, I think part of it is that most people who are even into comedy in the first place that would be on prime time, those are people who even just naturally have an easier time making fun of conservative people. Like, there's not a lot of Bransonites.
It's easier to make fun of conservatives than it is for conservatives to make fun of liberals.
Yes, that's fact. And kind of like journalism. I mean, they talk about the liberal bias in media, and I'll tell you, it'd be great if more conservative people actually entered the field to begin with. I mean, that's kind of...
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where you say people who are conservative, by and large... And I'm saying this as someone who entered journalism school as a conservative. I'm not saying this at poking shots. I'm saying I was lonely, right? There's just not very many of them. They go into other fields. Mm-hmm. And then they say, well, I can't believe all the liberal media in there. It's like, what do you want? You want affirmative action? I mean,
that's right.
Yeah. So, but it's not just conservatives who've criticized the show at times this season. Cast member Michael Che, we were just talking about him actually, who hosts the show's Weekend Update segment, agreed with the commander-in-chief in an interview with Esquire following the election. Che said, despite attempts to remain balanced, the show seems to have shifted leftward, and here's what he said. He said, oddly, I agree with him. We try to write that way, but I do agree with him. I think the show should show all views, and we make a conscious effort to do so. So he's saying that they try.
Yeah.
But he also believes that it happens.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Right.
if it were me, I would defend the point like I am now and say, you're right. It's way easier as a liberal to tease a conservative than to be a conservative show teasing liberals. You don't have the range. What is a comedian's position on most things? It's usually opposite the authoritarian, any type of authority. It's usually just, it sits opposite of any type of authority that sets up. A lot of conservative thought process have to do with morality and legislating morality. It's a natural setup that the comedian's angle is going to be on the opposite side of the group that's telling you how to behave in a bedroom. You know what I mean? And I think that's one thing where there's snowflakey. I mean, like I know SNL did a sketch about the bubble, and they were teasing. It was straight up teasing liberals about the bubble. And their election night one on 2016, the election night 2016 with Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle. That one was also teasing liberals. You know, so
and Black Jeopardy, which you
Black
showed me that.
Jeopardy, which is great.
That's actually one of my. That was hilarious.
Where they get along with the Trump supporter more than they thought they would.
The Trump supporters' answers
were,
and that's Tom Hanks, by the way.
Yes.
Which Tom Hanks, I love him anyway. I just do as an actor. But in that, he played that part so well, in my opinion. Right?
I think so. And I think it's one of those things where it's absolutely left leaning. But I don't think people should even deny that. I don't know why. I mean, you want to give a balance, but at the same time, how do you make it funny to have a position about deporting 11 million people? What is funny about that? What's funny about having a whole bunch of people hide from the people coming to deport them? Oh, there's an angle. That's about as simple as it is if you're looking for where do you get to the funny side of the argument, you know? And I just think in more, not all of them, but in more times than not, having a position antithetical to the conservative one in politics right now seems to be the one that's easier to play on. Especially on
primetime. I mean, it's kind of the medium for it, and there's not much competition online. I mean, you've got Newsbusters.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I mean,
and
you don't really.
You have a drove of comedic content rolling out of the White House right now. Like, I mean, with alternative facts and Sean Spicer, just his demeanor in general, like that.
Louder with Crowder does comedic stuff.
He does,
and some of his stuff's pretty funny.
Some of his stuff is funny.
It is funny. Yeah, he's another Michigander.
He is.
I didn't know this until 8 months ago.
Yep.
I had no clue. I was like, man, wow, how did he get to that feminist film festival in GR?
Yeah,
he
from
must have come
the
a
area.
long way. Yeah, and he's right up the road. During last night's show, a pre-taped segment featuring Kate McKinnon as Conway and Beck Bennett as CNN host Jake Tapper seemed to ignite a discussion about the show's bias and taste level. Now, we watched this, okay, and I didn't really think it was that funny. But you know what? Stuff flops sometimes. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it works, is some stuff just doesn't hit. But as I was watching it, I was like, part of it might be the style, too. It almost had a soap opera feel to it, where there was a sense of seriousness in it, where it was obviously a joke, but it was like Gonzo-y, in my opinion. It kind of was. Like, it gave the feel that it wasn't just purely a joke.
Well, they were trying to make her creepy. You know, Jake Tapper says he can't have her on the news, and he goes home, and then all of a sudden she's waiting for him in his apartment to tell him, hey, you know, why am I not on the news? You need to get me on the news, that sort of thing. So they were trying to paint it like she's obsessed with being in the news cycle.
Yeah, it was a spoof of the 1987 thriller Fatal Attraction, and I saw that movie.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I saw that movie while in high school, totally not allowed to. I think it was a bachelor party.
How dare you.
For a cop who later got in trouble for drunk driving twice. But anyway, So spoof of the 1987 thriller Fatal Attraction features McKinnon's Conway upset after being rejected as a guest on CNN's State of the Union for citing a non-existent Bowling Green massacre to justify President Trump's controversial travel ban. And they mentioned a bunch of people. Olivia Nuzzi, she covers the Trump administration for New York Magazine. She said, Saturday Night Live just gave a gift to the White House with this sexist, unfunny Kellyanne Conway skit. It will be interpreted as unfair and mean to a wife and mother. Washington Post columnist Jonathan Capehart, and he does not like Trump and Conway at all. He's accused her of providing a platform for white supremacy, He came against it, as did MSNBC host and NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
But Andrea Mitchell, I should have just said that. We all know who it is. So MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell. She also didn't like it.
Yeah, neither one of them were very happy about it. But I think what you said first is the kicker, is that where funny and where unfunny comes from is the same place. So you only know when you toe that line. It's the only option that you have is to toe that line. So in this case, I would have to say, yeah, maybe not the best of taste, but SNL will get a chance to do it again, and they certainly will.
We'll be back with John right after this.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
Welcome back to Paleo Radio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. We're going to jump right into the calls here. We've got John on the line here in GR, wants to talk about liberal comedy. How you doing today, John?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. What did you want to say?
Welcome back, Jeremy. Great to hear your voice again.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear, I don't know if you call it paradox, but your opinions on, you're right that there is basically comedians, obviously in the political realm, they're all basically liberal. And let's face it, I mean, conservative comedian or Christian comedian, that's an oxymoron. But on the flip side, the bulk, we're all entertained quite by the liberal comedians. Yet on radio, other than a very, very small piece of the world that you guys occupy, it's all Hannity and these whack jobs. And the percentage of talk radio that's conservative versus liberal. And then on the flip side, it's the paradox. Is that the word I want to use? I'm curious if you could discuss that, because you get into it pretty well. So I wonder what your opinions are on that.
Thank you so much. And actually, Joe, this is kind of a twofer question, because it plays into both of our specialties.
Yeah.
It plays into comedy and why, and it plays into talk radio and why. You know, what is the reason for why different people of different temperaments and philosophical persuasions, why they would find themselves in one medium opposed to another?
Well, I think my own opinion on this, and this is just my own opinion, but I think in the political field, because it has more of a air of seriousness, that brings in people that are very attuned to morality or concerned with morality into a realm that they're comfortable speaking in, and that seems to be more of a land for conservatives. Like, to me, it's not surprising that there's more conservative talk radio hosts than there are liberal ones, for the exact same reason why there's more liberal comedians than there are conservatives. It has to do with the nature of the positions that you take. And I think that when you're talking about politics, you're more likely to get on the air when you're defending status quo. And I'm not saying this to bash conservatives. I'm just saying it as a practical way of thinking, that many times conservatives' position is to defend a lot of status quo areas, or it's perceived that way. So you can have someone like Rush Limbaugh on for 20 years saying, I don't like these ideas, we shouldn't do anything. And he can stay there and have longevity. So I don't know if there's an actual definable reason why it's that way, but I think it's an easy landscape to see.
I think that with comedy, you have to kind of be willing to take on sacred cows. You have to be willing to be an iconoclast. Like, that's kind of, you're always on that line constantly. Most religious people love sacred cows. They've got their own golden calf. You know, they have their own sacred that you just simply don't joke about it. That's just something you don't joke about, and it plays itself out in things not just to do with God, like don't crack a joke about Jesus. You know, don't do that. Like the life of Brian or something.
Oh,
That's just over the line. But also, don't joke about sex. Mm-hmm. Don't joke about anything that in their theism, right, that they believe is a sacred thing, or you just simply don't joke. It's a real serious matter. Whereas people who are comedians, they'll crack jokes about, you know, anything.
They look for that.
Yeah, they look intentionally.
They're looking for people who are that way. Like the show South Park is entirely built upon the premise of rejecting whatever people are proposing. That's all it is. It doesn't matter what side. It's whatever's being proposed, you reject it and you tease it. All they're doing is scanning the political and social atmosphere to see, is there anything where people are taking a firm stand on something and believe you can't talk bad about it, and they find it and they go, yep, there it is. Let's write about it. Let's write about drafting little Ethiopian kids to play in the NBA, right? That's what they've done before, because they're like, there was problems with adoption and issues like that. So they're like, well, what if it was a joke that you're adopting kids to make you money in the NBA? Ha ha, that's funny. We're doing it, right? That's entirely built upon looking, just like you said, you're looking for sacred calves. And that's exactly it.
Well, yeah, and like that, people can say, well, South Park is selective. And you're like, yeah, but they make fun of the member berries. And they make fun of Trump being Mr. Garrison.
What about PC, bro?
That's what I was going to say.
He's liberal
PC
as
principle.
Heck. That's completely teasing people who are PC over the top.
And the people who are hardcore Trump train.
Yeah.
So you have the hardcore Trump train folks that are being made fun of, and you have the PC people being made fun of, and there it is. Whereas with and I wanted to say this, as John was talking, it made me think, and I said, there used to be a time where comedy was kind of this way and where it was on radio, and that was before TV.
Yeah.
There were variety shows, vaudeville. I mean, you have all of these things that used to be on legacy mediums, right, like radio. But then TV came around, and it was much easier. Instead of doing your live act, which a lot of these comedy shows were, they were live acts that were tucked within other things, circusy type things.
Like
even.
Carol Burnett, right?
Yeah, like variety shows. In fact, variety shows were huge with old-time radio, and I'm a junkie for this stuff. I actually listen to old-time shows. But they used to do that, and then they went to TV, right? You have the vaudeville goes away. You no longer have that where it was shown or played over radio, and they had to go onto a visual medium, the Three Stooges. So you have the Three Stooges, and you have other groups that were comedic that ended up finding their way from radio and then navigating to that place where everyone was now around a TV, right? And so you have that. But then radio, what happened? Radio at that time would have been almost entirely made up of certain styles of music, bluegrass, gospel stuff, a lot of stuff like that, and pastors. Mm-hmm. And so it was a neat fit to have these talk radio guys, and talk radio guys, especially when they're by themselves and they're pontificating all the time, right? And I'm saying this as someone who's done this, that you're kind of like a pastor, and that's your church. Mm-hmm. You have a platform every time, and you get up there and you tell your stories with authority, right? Even if it's just brand new, it's not even developed. You have a narrative that you're spinning, and you're really good at telling stories. And that's actually a conservative advantage that in overall, and that's kind of a competing thing, because I think liberals have an advantage of storytelling when it comes to comedy.
Yeah.
But when it comes to storytelling regarding politics or regarding other things, the spinning and creating of narratives and even myth is something that conservatives seem to specialize in.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at it, the positions that they're in stay the same, but it's just a matter of how you're asking the question. If you're asking on more items that have to do with being extremely serious or having a high level of morality, and we don't talk about this because it seriously offends me, that's gonna angle towards a conservative argument every time. And if you get into the ones where it's picking or possibly saying the wrong thing in a group or not knowing the right social settings and stuff, I don't know if that's technically liberal, but that certainly is a definition of comedy, is that sometimes the funniest people can be the ones that literally just don't understand social norms that they break. They're saying things that are so outlandish it drops your jaw to the floor, right? And that kind of plays into it too. Tangentially,
but related. It makes me wonder, why is it, and I wonder your opinion on this, why is it that liberals have had such a difficult time in the medium of radio, talk radio? That you have groups like Air America, right? They got to be bailed out like crazy by Al Gore. You have a lot of these things, even just purely liberal TV stations seem to have a really difficult time. We broadcast from one here, WPRR. And, you look at other stations in town, it's a difficult thing. It's an uphill battle for any progressive or liberal thing. on talk radio. Why? What is your opinion about that, Joe? Because they seem to do well in other venues. Like, they seem to do well with comedy and with other things. But when it comes to venues, even with churches and stuff, that they kind of, anywhere where you have an audience that's listening to people speaking in that way, it seems like the numbers just aren't there.
It may go back to, and I know I'm being kind of vague here, but it may go back to the status quo issue, where a lot of liberal talk radio would be pushing for activism and change and movement. I mean, not many liberal talk radio shows talk about how mostly everything is pretty much okay and we just have to tweak the system here and there. And when you have conservative talk radio, a lot of it pulls from nostalgia. It pulls from, this is how it was back in the day and we're going to keep it that way. And it has a natural place that sets in a medium like radio to me, where it was, just remember the good old times. And this is also why I think, conversely, we're seeing in podcasting this isn't necessarily true. In podcasting, even comedy podcasts are some of the highest or most listened to podcasts in the medium of podcasting in general.
And I think, I'm glad you said that part, because, and we're actually going to kind of touch on this a little bit later when we talk about the Grammys, and talk about the mega shift that has been happening culturally, that we've talked about on the show, about how legacy mediums are dying. And this has been a long, slow death for them. They're still doing obviously quite well. I mean, they're making money. It's not like they're on death's door. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you look at the reach, if you look at what people are using to access this, they're accessing it digitally. Their news. They're not going with the legacy mediums. They're not sitting around the radio anymore. They're not sitting around the TV anymore to watch the nightly news together and hear Edward Murrow and all of that. That is not real anymore. And so it's kind of the same way with this, where people go in and they're able to choose now what they want to hear in a way that's far more a la carte and more reflective of what their values are. And you're finding that, wow, liberal talk actually has a place, right?
Yeah.
Like it's yes. There's a problem with the medium. There's a problem with the institutional construct that we have in society of radio and frequencies and how they're bought and how they're controlled and different things like that. People don't fully grasp that.
Yeah, and society itself has changed in a way where it's much more liberal in general. You can have a black and a white couple or an interracial couple in your Downy commercial, and that actually doesn't spark outrage and letters to the FCC like it did not even 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. We're at the level now in our media and our commercials where putting gay couples up is controversial. But it used to be interracial couples. It used to just be different. Unless it was the absolute cookie cutter style of commercial, you had some pushback. And it's the same way with sponsorships. And I'm sure that radio stations a lot of times and most places were considering, let's keep it as safe as we can possibly do it. Let's not take any chances. And let's get this conservative talk radio in here. We know pretty much what's going to be said. Bam, we can focus on it.
And we're going to talk more about that, in fact, in the liberalizing of the country. Most Americans don't support religious liberty rights for Christian businesses. It's by the Christian Post. We're going to have fun. 616-656-1680. Call the show, 616-656-1680. We'll be right back.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to PaleoRadio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM.
The greatest show on earth, period. You got to go check us out on Spreaker, PaleoRadio Show. Become a follower today. You got to go check it out. And listen, we mentioned public reality radio earlier. We should just say this. We don't say it at the beginning of the show. But the views expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect the views of the station. But more importantly is that our funding doesn't come from sponsors or from the station.
No.
Like, we do not, and I know that there are people, in fact, some people have come and talked to me about it and said, well, how much money do you make doing what you do? And I always say, well, how do you think we make money? And there's a kind of an assumption that, well, you're on radio, you're in a station. But that's not how this works. This is a community station that is owned by Bob Goodrich. And he provides a platform for local people to come in and do this. but we're self-made men. And so we've put together the work. In fact, we need to announce this. This is the first show since this happened. We have an LLC.
Yeah.
We are an LLC.
We are an LLC. So
yes.
we're our own entity and our own company, yes. And we own and control all of our own content. But more importantly, like you said, we make our own money. So the easiest way to contribute to Paleo Radio, if you do like what we do and you like the work that we do, is to go to patreon.com and search for Paleo Radio, and you can contribute there. But the most important thing is, like we always say and we always remind people, the episodes are always going to be free. You'll always get the free episodes. If you like what we're doing and you want to contribute, you can contribute we ask $1 per episode. That's like a Sunday paper, right?
It's cheaper than that.
But you also get expanded content on top of that. You get content that nobody else can get if you donate over $1. Again, you could donate $0.25. Anything helps, right? But we really love what we do, and the best way to do that and to be able to cover any topic that we want to cover without worry about getting reprimanded in any way by sponsorship is through individual donations and through Patreon.
You know, I was talking with my kids yesterday, or 2 nights ago. And we were talking about Fred. Do you remember the YouTube character Fred? He had that really high-pitched, almost chipmunk voice, and he was real crazy and zany. And they made a movie where he went to camp, and it was a Nickelodeon film, I think, and John Cena was his imaginary dad. Really cool character, right? Started as a YouTube show. Well, I've never heard him in his natural voice, ever. I've never seen him out of character. Well, I see this video on YouTube, and it said it was for me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, well, I want to hear what this guy sounds like. In the conversation, he's being asked questions about his past, and he says, the guy asking the questions said, you had a lot of characters, actually, when you first started. His face lit up, super happy to talk about the origins of his work and the creative process. He said, yeah, I had a lot of characters, and I paused it for my kids. I covered his face except for his eyes, and I said, name the emotion. And they said happy, because his eyes were smiling, right? But then as it goes, he kind of starts to fumble a little, and he's fidgeting with his hands. And he says, then it got offered to be picked up. And he said, I was afraid that maybe, a big producer would come in and they would take over and tell me what I had to do. And he's kind of ho-humming on this. And he said, at that point, he said, but they hired a lot of people who know a lot about the show and the character, and they know a lot about it. And I still have some, they still allow me basically to have some creative input. And I paused it at that point, and I covered his face, and I said, what does he look like? And they said, sad. And I said, do you know what it means when he says they allow me to have some creative input? What that means is sometimes they look at the creator of that character, the person who plays the role, and they say no.
He said sometimes, more often than not.
So they say no to him on his character. And my kids said happy, sad. It was visible. You could see it in his face and in the way he was moving and everything. And I said, that's why we do what we do. We don't want that big producer person at all for the show, because we want our listeners to know that every time we approach this mic on Monday, every single time we do it, that we are telling them stuff that, right or wrong, it's from our hearts. It's our stuff. This is our vision and our show. These are our beliefs about this. And the only way to do that is to say, listen, Lucas, Fred, right? I don't want to do what you did. I don't want the sad face. I want the smile still. And right now, we're sitting here not on a big mountain of gold, but we're smiling. And to me, I say thank you to everybody who listens to the show, every single person who sponsors who gives money, every single one. I say thank you. Big time love.
That's great. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. If not, then what are we doing it all for, right? It's like what Creed Bratton said on The Office. If I can't scuba, then what is this all about? No.
This whole streaming revolution thing. It's interesting. This is actually the Express Tribune. And a couple of the stories that I pulled from this week aren't even from this country. They were shared. One was shared through Yahoo News, so they picked it up. And I said, wow, this is a cool one. The Express Tribune. Streaming revolution takes over Grammys, Los Angeles. Streaming has rapidly transformed the music industry, and if there's to be a single moment to confirm the format's arrival, it may be the upcoming Grammy Awards, obviously written before last night.
Absolutely.
The music industry's most prestigious awards, which takes place Sunday, is a star-studded gala in Los Angeles. This year, for the first time, considered releases that were only streamed online. So this is the first time that the Grammys has said, okay, we are actually going to feature artists and songs and everything that was never even put on CD at all.
Yeah.
That's huge.
That is.
Yeah, and especially this really affected Chance the Rapper, which, by the way, won one of the awards.
And is fantastic.
Yeah, totally fantastic. Was it I might have been Rapper of the Year. I'm trying to think what he won. Oh, yeah, Best New Artist.
Best New Artist.
Chance the Rapper. Yeah.
Yep.
So, you have this transition where even institutions, right, legacy institutions, in fact, that have almost entirely been beholden to legacy mediums, that they are now saying there's a new kid on the block here, and this new kid is super dope, right? People love this new kid. This new kid is digital.
Yes. Yeah, Chance the Rapper is absolutely digital, and his whole idea is that he doesn't want to make money through the stream service or selling the music through what would to make it easier for people to understand what would be the old CD game of selling all your CDs. He wants to use the internet as his way of gaining marketing and to make his big money when he does his shows. And to really earn through the shows. So from the article, it says, the Chicago artist, this is Chance the Rapper, insists he doesn't ever plan to sell his songs. His music giveaways have become part of a social media strategy, with touring being his primary source of revenue.
Yes.
So his whole idea is you get the music for free, but then you can come to the show, and that's where I'm going to make my money.
He told Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show, he said this, quote, "There's so many ways that music moves around now. I feel like trying to fit it into a for-sale album is kind of obsolete now. It gives me more space to create and put out stuff." Totally true.
Yeah.
Totally 100% true. That you now have, what was it when Beck, this is about a year old. I remember before Beck won, I think last year, didn't he win Album of the Year?
Yes.
Or
Yeah,
Artist of the Year.
Controversially.
Yes,
Yeah.
controversially. We talked about that on the show, actually.
We did.
Yeah, and so Beck won, but I remember before that, leading up to it, him and people who worked with him, he was saying, listen, you don't even need to go in anymore to these legacy places and go to your producers who then pick the name of your album and tell you what order they have to be in and tell you what order they have to be released in. You're not beholden to that. He said you can go and create a SoundCloud or whatever. You can go online, upload your stuff, and you're going to have a bunch of followers and stuff. So some of his band members went and created their own thing one night, and within a very small period of time, dude, they had I think they had gigs lined up and everything. They didn't have to go through these old pathways.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, online has done for podcasting and radio the same thing as it did for music in the same exact sense, that now you have the machinery that you need to record anything right at your fingertips at home, and you can put it up into a platform that has a large audience. You don't need to go through the gatekeepers anymore. So like you said, the old producer, that is becoming old hat. You don't need it. You literally don't. SoundCloud can produce what you need without it. Look at what we're doing as we speak. We don't have a producer, like you were saying. It's going right back into the argument, but we don't have anybody above us. We're making all of these decisions ourselves and creating our own content, free of that dictatorial process.
And it's saying, I hope, and I don't know how this would play out. In fact, I'd love to hear what Chance has to say about this and what other people have to say about this. But one thing, being in the business of radio since I was 15 and growing up with my dad in this, one thing that's really bothered me is hit radio. When people complain and they say, man, I turn on a station and I hear the same stupid songs, all the time. I'm so sick and tired of it. There's a reason for that. And one of the reasons is, if you call a station, and I'd like to know if anything has changed with this. It's been a while since I've been spinning music. But you wouldn't be able to just play any song off of a record. You could only play songs that were released. Mm-hmm. So you might have, how many songs can we think of, right, in our own lives that we love from a CD, that we love a lot? Maybe our favorite song from a CD that may not have been released. Or one-hit wonders where the song that they actually were known for might not be as good as another one. That's, in my opinion anyway. And I would have to tell so many people, and they'd call and say, can you play this song? Can you play that song? I'd always have to kind of divert it and direct them and say, well, I can play this one or this one. And I knew in their heart when I said that, I knew they were devastated because they were saying, I've heard those songs a bazillion times. It's why I'm asking for another one.
Mm-hmm.
I knew you could. And so I don't know how this might affect that, where you say, can they pool now? How long will it be before they'll be able to begin pooling from songs that are on CDs or on digital that are like, let's say, on Spotify, but are not released in an order where you can only play that one song until another one's released?
I know one thing that's majorly changed is they don't even have a person sitting in the studio that plays music for you anymore.
You can't call hardly ever and even do requests.
You can go to their website and vote, and the largest vote gets it, or you can add it to a queue, and it just plays it in the order of whatever people add.
Yeah.
Literally, the online service is doing the job of the DJ.
And I saw this. I've lived and worked in the business long enough that I've seen reel-to-reel used. I've seen records used. I've seen cassette tapes used. I've seen CDs used. And now I've seen it where CDs and everything was removed from a station, and now you walk in and it's a computer and a soundboard.
Yeah.
And I have witnessed this. I've seen it. And so I look at it and say, how is this going to change the presentation of music that people look for when they say, I want somebody or something to create a playlist that mixes up music and allows me to hear a diverse array of songs, and how it might be impacted the hit radio format. I would love to see it just die. Nobody likes it. I have never met somebody that goes, dude, I love that station that plays the same songs I've heard 1,000 times for years.
That's right.
You don't hear it.
But I also think we may be trading that off for having a radio DJs in itself.
Yeah.
The complaint that the DJs have made of saying, hey, I can't play whatever music I want to play. You're right. Now the streaming service can, and we don't need you in the radio station anymore. So it could be more bad than good. But stick around, folks. We'll be right back. 95.3 FM, 1680
For
AM.
debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
I love this show, Joe. It's an amazing day to be alive, bright and sunny, and also a little cold here
is a
in
little
Michigan.
chilly.
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious. I love my dad like crazy. But it's one of these things where whenever he comes to visit, he kind of cracks a joke about global warming, and he comes on days where it's like a lot of snow. Like the maybe 2 days in Michigan this winter where there's been snow. And it's kind of a dumps kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, if you were only here a couple days later, the argument doesn't work, of course. I mean, that's not how we play that game anyway. But I just think it's really interesting just how much like spring it is. And it's been like spring, I don't know, all Christmas long, Joe.
Yes, it has been.
Yeah, all winter long.
It's been warm and cold and warm and cold. And the funny thing about living in Michigan is whenever it gets warm like this in February, people will say, yeah, this is great. And they seem to forget that when it gets cold, all that snow that melts and turns to water becomes ice, and then everyone flies off the road 3 days later. So let's just say right now I'm banking on the fact that by Thursday or Friday we're going to have ice.
As a lead-in to the whole topic about algorithms, and listen, I encourage people to give us a call, 616-656-1680. If you have anything to contribute, 616-656-1680. But we wanted to just say real quickly before moving on to talk about algorithms, the different philosophies that are kind of playing themselves out with the Grammys this year in approaching digital. And there were three that were referenced in this piece. And I'm talking about Streaming Revolution Takes Over Grammys by the Express Tribune, written before the Grammys. But Beyoncé, who leads the Grammys with 9 nominations, sprung her previously unannounced album Lemonade onto Tidal, the upstart streaming service led by her husband, Jay-Z. Mm-hmm. She started selling Lemonade on iTunes a day later, and within 2 weeks put it out on CD, but has not streamed it on Tidal's rivals. So that would be what? Spotify, iTunes, Pandora. Yeah. So Toronto rapper Drake released Views, his album, through Apple for a 2-week exclusive period. Okay, so he went that route at first for 2 weeks. England's Adele released 25. That's the top-selling album in recent years. Only through CDs, vinyl, and digital downloads. It started streaming 7 months later.
So she went the other way.
Yeah. Now, there are people who said that it makes sense for somebody with broad popularity to do that. That's an easy thing. But if you don't have broad popularity, you're kind of restricted.
Yes.
There are other, not restricted, but that there are other avenues which are more cost effective, not as labor intensive, blast you out to more people quicker, stuff like that. And then you have, and this is actually a little bit older, but Taylor Swift, reigning in Album of the Year, also resisted streaming initially. She waged a campaign against Spotify. And then Kanye West, the last one mentioned here, he's up for 8 Grammys, declared Life of Pablo to be a new type of release, a living album, which he fine-tuned even after its release on Tidal.
Yeah, which that's unique. And, of course, Kanye's always got to do it a little bit different. That's his style.
Yeah, it's his style. But
Yes.
you were saying during the break, you were saying something about whether or not it's actually more liberating to go through mediums online, or if, in fact, it's more restricting, if there's a bigger trade-off than maybe a lot of people are admitting.
It brings up the question because a name that people should try to look up is Aloe Black. That's ALOE and it's BLACC. But he's an artist. He does it's kind of more jazz, blues, soul type of music. But he writes, produces, and creates all of his own music. And he's got a serious problem with companies like Spotify for that exact reason of saying, look, I get a lot of money as an artist, but you're killing these people that are writing the songs. I mean, because for people that don't know a lot about the music industry, most people are not writing and composing their own music. There's somebody who's writing and composing it and handing it over to an artist, and the artist is singing the song. And the only way those people continue to make a living is by getting a good cut of the pie for the song that they've written. And streaming services like Tidal and Spotify are becoming very similar to what old producers used to be back in the day of controlling that content and not allowing a big amount of it to go to it. So Aloe Black basically has said, I would actually be performing less and writing more music, but because of the way of the industry, I actually have to perform all of my stuff in order to continue to be an artist. So he kind of takes it the other way and says the streaming services like SoundCloud are more liberating, but Tidal, Spotify, Pandora, those are the new age
gatekeepers.
They're the new age gatekeepers.
Yeah. And they're going to have their, I wonder about this, that you're kind of left at the behest. It's the same thing with YouTube and other things, like you're left with their rules, their gatekeeping, their preferences, their structuring and ordering of things, and that they're wanting to make money too. Right? It's a for-profit venture with this.
But
I was going to say too, it's been interesting to kind of watch as people who are popular in the business react to the environment of the commercial environment of it. And take Eminem as an example. I remember Eminem as well as Dr. Dre going from simply being rappers to being people who are producing. Mm-hmm. And they started having their own labels. And then later, when what is a label? What is a label putting out at the time? CDs. But then CDs start to struggle. So then you start to see bigwigs like Jay-Z and others that begin evolving in that environment.
And they make a streaming service.
Yeah, and so you can kind of look at them now as trailblazers, and you can kind of say, listen, they're pretty tuned in to the way that money's flowing in this business. They want to maximize money. They're understanding how commercially this thing is beginning to operate and change with technology. And so to even just see the first fruits of this and the players who are involved in how it's working out, I find it fascinating, and I'm interested to see how cookies crumble.
Well, it's something like Chance the Rapper is a great example of that, where he's looking for alternative revenues, or he's basing his revenues on one of them. Most people would make their money from their album sales and their CD sales and just stack mad cash, right? But his idea is saying, I'm going to get that. I'm going to offset the money I would make on my albums by selling my music by getting marketing campaigns. He's in Coca-Cola commercials. Chance the Rapper is, right? Yeah. So he's obviously a little bit more savvy about this game than other people, thinking about how he's going to work and make his money through marketing, and then also make his money through his shows, but not have to earn anything through selling of the music.
I've always been fascinated by people who try different tricks like this. Yanni. And I know I've said this before.
Yeah, your boy, Yanni.
My boy. You know it, Joe.
Yes.
You've been in my
house.
house.
You had a big, long Yanni kick for a while.
I did. I had a Yanni kick, man. It happens every handful of years. I'll go back and start listening to that guy and just cry my heart out. I love him. I love his music. But one thing about him that I've always appreciated is that he took a different road. He knew that his style of music, he was kind of going uphill. And so what he did is he worked really hard to coordinate with bigger venues and say, I'm willing to do a PBS thing for you, right, at the Taj Mahal, And so we can make it real pretty. We'll do it for a fundraiser, but it put him out there to where now he's seen by tons of people. And so he was a guy that tried doing it in a way that it was different, right? And so to say individuals like him, individuals like Chance the Rapper, right? People that are pressing the boundaries and saying we're looking for ways to get income. PaleoRadio saying we're not making money through ordinary means here at Public Reality Radio. We're experimenting with different things. A lot of people are experimenting with Patreon. We have a Patreon, but we also are saying we want to make a lot of our money through comedy. You want to do comedy with your life. I want to do public speaking. I'm writing a book right now. There's other things that we're doing that are bringing in money while we still come in and do this, and this is our thing. So to see how people are trying to get into media, how they're trying to get to that breakthrough moment for themselves in their careers and the different techniques and tactics that they use, I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I am too. But another fascinating thing is how algorithms are creeping into every part of our lives right now, JB.
It's true. And it was funny. I don't often see something that's shared on Yahoo News and right underneath it on InfoWars.
Yeah, Yahoo News and InfoWars.
Yahoo News and InfoWars. And this is by Rob Lever over the Daily Star of Lebanon.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Daily Star of Lebanon, getting them from all over the place. But this does have some great content. In the article, it says, when you browse online for a new pair of shoes, pick a movie to stream from Netflix, or apply for a car loan, an algorithm likely has a word to say in the outcome. The complex mathematical formulas are playing a growing role in all walks of life, from detecting skin cancers to suggesting new Facebook friends, deciding who gets a job, how police resources are deployed, who gets insurance at what cost, and who is on the no-fly list. Algorithms are being used experimentally to write news articles from raw data, while Donald Trump's presidential campaign was helped by behavioral marketers who used an algorithm to locate the highest concentrations of, quote, persuadable voters.
You know, in that list, for one, let me just say this again, Mark Zuckerberg, your algorithm sucks. I have an agenda, I think, or a vendetta. I don't know what it is. But Mark Zuckerberg, I hate your algorithm. It's terrible. But the whole thing about writing news articles from raw data, I remember when they first started doing that. I was in journalism school when that was really starting to kind of come around. That's kind of creepy. What that means is that you have a bunch of data. Let's say that you get your AP wire is sent into you, and you end up getting this AP wire, and it's just got a bunch of information on it. This algorithm will take that information, find out the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and write that story out.
Yeah.
And and they found that, well, sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's kind of like that Twitter bot that went all racist.
The racist Twitter bot.
Yeah, the racist Twitter bot.
Yes. If people forgot about that one, we're going to have to cover that again. The Twitter bot that was going to learn from humanity and became racist and a Nazi lover in like 3 days.
Super hardcore Nazi. I remember. It did, yes.
And this is an algorithm. This was a complete AI, artificial intelligence running that was going to learn from human beings, and in 3 days became a white supremacist.
Saying that the Holocaust was not real.
Yeah, a Holocaust denying white supremacists.
Right. So you have this, and we're going to talk a lot more about algorithms and what it does in your life, but we're at the end of hour one, Joe.
We are at the end of hour one, but there's going to be much, much more after this. We're going to continue the conversation with algorithms. We're going to be talking about couples with joint Facebook accounts. We're going to be talking about Michael Flynn and his relationship with speaking with the Russians, which raised some eyebrows. And maybe if we get a chance, we'll talk about the Smothers Brothers a little bit.
It's going to be a bunch of fun. Don't go anywhere. 616-656-1680. We'll be right back.
You are now entering PaleoRadio.
Welcome to PaleoRadio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
It's true, Paleocrat and Paleo Joe. Every Monday from 10 to noon Eastern Standard Time, broadcasting live right here in the Public Reality Radio studios in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You can call us at any time at 616-656-1680 to join the show. Joe, this algorithm story, we talk a lot about this kind of stuff when it comes to media, when it comes to social media, even our conversation about the Grammys.
Yes.
Talking about if people want to use mediums online, you're now in the world of algorithms. Like that's just you're getting around a producer, but you're now in a world of kind of a producer's algorithm, a gatekeeper's algorithm.
It's still a gatekeeper's game. Again, this is an article from the Daily Star of Lebanon. It's entitled "How Algorithms Secretly Run the World or Your Life." Going back into it, there's some good content here. It says, but while such automated tools can inject a measure of objectivity into formerly subjected decisions, fears are rising over the lack of transparency that algorithms can entail, with pressure growing to apply standards of ethics or, quote, accountability.
Just to know what they are.
Well, yes.
I mean, just
absolutely.
to know, and that's a game everybody plays on Facebook. Everybody knows it. Where they're like, man, how should I word this? I mean, I went and looked up stuff, and it was saying that posts with words like congratulations or hooray get more views. Right, and people try to play the game and do these weather balloons to try to figure out this algorithm. And why is my post not being seen by very many people? I really tried hard. I thought people would like it.
Well, and there's parts of the algorithm that work against it. This is just free info for you folks. So get your pens and pad of paper. No, the one thing is, if you're posting a video, don't have a paragraph over top of it. You killed your algorithm. It's murdered. If you're posting a visual medium, Facebook's interpreting it as a visual medium, not a red one, not one that you're going to be looking through and reading through the context of it. If you post an article, you can post a paragraph. If you post a video and you put a paragraph onto it, you killed the algorithm. It's not going anywhere. Half the people that you think are going to see it aren't going to see it. Most of the time, I found that if you keep it a sentence or less, if you're posting a video, you will get most of the algorithm. Even words like just yikes or wow or didn't see that coming, and you put it with a video, that is actually more likely to enhance the algorithm.
What we're saying is, if you want to know the secret of success on social media, you got to really work hard on dumbing it down.
You got to dumb it down.
I mean it.
Dumb it down.
And that's what makes sense out of when people are talking, how do memes and all that stuff affect how people process things? Are we really doing very well on logic or reasoning and processing things? And you're like, no, because you have the main place people go to converse, and the algorithm prefers dumbing stuff down.
Absolutely.
It does. This is a weird thing. I mean, I've got like 526 followers, and I want to thank every single one of you. I don't know who you are, and I'm really happy that you follow me. But you then share something on Facebook. So you got like 1,700 friends. You got 500-something followers, and you got 2 likes on a post almost consistently every time, and it's ones that are promoting what you do for a living. Mm-hmm. Even if it doesn't say go and buy something. If it just says, man, I really enjoy this is my job, so on, so on, so on, here's how you can listen. If there's anything that remotely sounds like kind of an advert, that if it even kind of looks like that, those predictably, I can bet money that if I post right after that, if I post something that says butter cookies are delicious, yummy, and I have a picture of a butter cookie with like a bite out of it, and that's what I shared, I'm going to have like 90 likes. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have a whole bunch of stuff. And you say, and people can say, well, maybe people just don't like your stuff. And you're like, yeah, but that's why people you don't have 500-something followers because they like your butter cookie post.
Yeah. Well, too, a lot of it is, it's an arms race. You can thank the reason why if you put something like, I love what I do, and it kills your algorithm on Facebook, the reason why that is because of people that spam, which is also why if you've noticed when people on Facebook or people that are trying to sell ads and hide it, sell it through something where it goes through someone else's page, and the person says like, look at these awesome products that I found, right? We're dealing with an arms race between advertising and algorithms, and they fight each other, and spam advertising. And so that plays a role into it. But into the article, data scientist Kathy O'Neill cautions about blindly trusting formulas to determine the fair outcomes. She says, quote, algorithms are not inherently fair because the person who builds them basically defines the model of success.
Yes. So the person who builds the algorithm, that's the gatekeeper. You're simply saying, you can't just blindly trust gatekeepers. Just say that instead. You can't blindly trust gatekeepers. You have to know who they are. You have to know and say, what is it that is what is successful? What do you actually say is a good thing? Otherwise, you're just left to this chance world where you're like, well, I can't judge myself too harshly if I'm breaking an algorithm that I don't know how it works. Yeah. And I can't get too bummed if nobody ever sees my stuff.
And the other thing, too, is let's just remind everybody, this isn't just about social media.
Right.
They run algorithms about when you do online postings for your job. That's the thing. When someone says, man, my resume is killing it, but I can't get a job interview. Why? There's something on that sucker that's not fitting through the algorithm correctly. I mean, they have a list of some examples of how algorithms have not necessarily worked out in the favor of everybody. And here's a couple that O'Neill wrote in her book, Weapons of Math Destruction, which is very clever. I like that, 2016 book. And one example, public schools in Washington, D.C. in 2010 fired more than 200 teachers, including several well-respected instructors, based on scores of an algorithm that had a formula which evaluated performance.
Yeah.
But over 200 people. A man diagnosed with bipolar disorder was rejected from employment at seven major retailers after a third-party, quote, personality test deemed him a high risk based on the algorithm.
Yeah.
Many jurisdictions are using, quote, predictive policing to shift resources to likely hot spots. O'Neill says that depending on how data is fed into the system, this could lead to discovery of minor crimes in a feedback loop that stigmatize poor communities.
Yes. And so that's why you need to know who's writing it. What does it point toward? What does it say is valuable? How does it pool it together? How does it distribute it? What exactly is being done by this, especially with law enforcement, especially when you're playing, what was the Tom Cruise movie, man, about predictive policing?
Minority Report.
Especially when you're playing Minority Report, you need to kind of know the oracles.
Absolutely.
You do. You got to know. Well, you have to know the oracles.
If there's no morality, if there's no ethics into it, then there's a serious question. There's got to be some oversight. Here's one more, especially for this. Some courts rely on computer-ranked formulas to determine jail sentences and parole, which may discriminate against minorities, taking into account, quote, risk factors, such as their neighborhoods and friend or family links to crime. So, yeah, you can get the algorithm could run and give you a higher jail sentence based on the people you live around.
Which kind of treats you like a stereotype in a way. Like a static thing.
Like
exactly. Like, it's like, well, this is just how it's going to play itself out probabilistically. And so, well, we're just going to go ahead and do this to you. And you're like, what? Have I been found guilty of that? Have I done any of that? No, but we have an algorithm. We have some oracles that say that in the future, there's a good probability for you. And we're going to factor that into how we penalize you now for what you've actually done.
Yeah.
Obviously not good. Her findings were echoed in a White House report last year. That's actually an encouraging sign, warning that algorithmic systems, quote, are not infallible. They rely on imperfect inputs, logic, probability, and people who design them.
There's the infallibility.
Yeah.
That the people still are in part designing this. So, and it's not to say that the computer system would be absolutely perfect without it, but the human error is the focus that we should be worried about, right? The fact that the person themselves is the one that's driving what the algorithm's intent is, and so therefore it's really still human intent that's driving the system. So we have to be cognizant of that, and you have to have ethics. You have to have oversight.
Part of the problem, she said, stems from asking computers to answer questions that have no single right answer. Quote, they are subjective, open-ended, and value-laden questions, asking who should the company hire, which update from which friend should you be shown, which convict is more likely to reoffend.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are tough questions. And saying, all right, Mr. Computer, with a human-made algorithm, come up with the answer for me.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
a little bit of a worry. Frank Pascal, who's at the University of Maryland and a law professor there, and he's author of the book The Black Box Society, The Secret Algorithms That Control Money and Information. He suggests one way to remedy unfair effects of this may be to enforce existing laws on consumer protection or deceptive practices. So he says that some of the laws are actually already in place. We just need to apply them to how algorithms run. So we may have already solved some of this problem already.
And he points to the European Union's data protection law.
That damn EU.
Right. Set from next year to create a right of explanation when consumers are impacted by an algorithmic decision as a model that could be expanded. So they're basically saying, that people would have a right of explanation if they felt that the algorithm negatively impacted them. Yeah. I don't know if that's what it means by right of explanation when consumers are impacted by a decision made by an algorithm, they have a right of explanation.
It needs to say why.
Yeah.
What excluded them.
And this is something that would have, we've had some dealings with Facebook even as a show, as PaleoRadio. And that's a really tough, we were kind of joking. How do you actually contact them?
Yeah.
How do you get an explanation from Zucky?
It's a big electronic front.
Yeah, it's an electronic front. I mean, what is this thing? And so you're like, hey, I'm making an appeal. I'm hoping that you amend this decision that you've made that's really harming our Facebook page and our reach and stuff. There's no right that I can invoke that they're even going to respond to me.
Yeah.
Right. There's no this show, we don't have a right. In that way, that would be great to have. Just to even know that we would get an answer in a situation like that. And luckily, ours was resolved. I mean, we're victorious. But you sit there and you say we need some kind of protection as a business.
Yes,
as a business needs to know why is it that you've made this decision.
Yes, and also at the same time, we have to be careful because we're walking a tightrope. Others, meanwhile, caution that algorithms should not be made a scapegoat for societal ills. Quote, people get angry and they're looking for something to blame. This was said by Daniel Castro, who's the vice president of Information Technology Innovation Foundation. Quote, we are concerned about bias, accountability, and ethical decisions, but those exist whether you are using algorithms or not. So it's an interesting point to say, too, where, like you said, on the Facebook posts, there are likely times where someone posted something that people just didn't particularly like, right? And so the algorithm may end up being a scapegoat in the way that a word like, I think, mainstream media is scapegoated, where the mainstream media is conservative and liberal at the same time and biased, but biased towards your enemy at the same time is everybody. It becomes a scapegoat.
At least we can go and say, well, who owns the New York Times? Who owns WAPO? Who makes the decisions regarding this? There's movies like Outfoxed that show the process. We need the process for algorithms. We'll be right back.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
Welcome back, folks. Paleo Radio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. And as always, you can call in 616-656-1680 to join the action.
It's always a bunch of fun.
It is always a bunch of fun.
Yeah, 616-656-1680. I love this show, Joe. I love it with all of my heart.
I love it as well.
I do. I love doing it.
Good, happy, fun time.
And we have amazing followers. We have amazing listeners to this program. They're all amazing. Our fans on iTunes, our fans on Spreakers. And really, podcasters, you're the backbone of the show. I know that we broadcast live from a studio, but the bulk of our people are on Spreaker. They're on iTunes. They connect with us on Facebook at facebook.com/PaleoRadio. They connect with us on Twitter at Paleo Radio Show. We love every single one of you, and you're a valuable and important part of what we do. And it's awesome because, and speaking personally, I wrote a speech and I delivered it yesterday to Sunday Assembly, and I talked about love. Sunday Assembly in Kalamazoo. It's my first time. It was at a synagogue, interestingly enough. First time I've ever spoken at a synagogue. But I was thinking about all the people who listen to the show who've reached out to me over the last 2 years, mainly about Sam even, my daughter who died of cancer, that they've reached out, they've written songs and supported us, that they say, this song was inspired by your story or your daughter. And the kind of memes that people have made about us, where they go and they make memes. People like Mel Rice.
Yeah.
Tyson, her cat.
Yes,
right?
Mel Rice and Tyson. Tyson obviously helps out with those memes.
Yes, Tyson obviously helps out. Tyson is definitely one of my favorite listeners to the program. He was really pumped up yesterday. There was a video that was shared. We were tagged in it, actually, that has Tyson. He's waiting for Paleo Radio. How much longer?
Yeah.
And of course, it was about 10 hours to wait. But we're so grateful for every single one of you. And actually, this story kind of came up from a conversation that happened on our wall. We shared on Paleo Radio, we shared an article from the Free Thought Project.
Yes.
That had to do with 9/11 and claims. And the status update that we posted said, what? Like this?
Yes.
And somebody, a friend of mine, came in and was saying that maybe it was irresponsible to even post that makes it hard because there are people who will share it and think that it's real, and people who will go, well, we don't believe this, and said that maybe it was irresponsible that we shared it. And I thought, on the one hand, point taken. On the other hand, I don't know, and this is an open challenge, I guess, I don't know of any show out there in the secular community that focuses so much time to journalistic ethics and law, to media ecology and theory, to communication theory, and to the vetting process that everybody should do always, like way before Trump was even born, like what people should do when vetting stories to find out whether they're true. Yeah. And I said, this show kind of is a standalone in that way. We dedicate immense amount of time to talking this out, and our listeners and our people online, I think, are really astute.
Yes. Well, and they are, and I credit them for finding that, and I agree. It opens up a good debate. We also have shared articles from The Onion with satirical comments on the top as well. So I think the important thing, too, is, and full disclosure, I'm the one who shared it. What wasn't and maybe I should have put a winky face, but it wasn't it wasn't saying that it was endorsement. Yeah. It was going, wow, guys, did you hear that Free Thought Blogs thinks that 9/11 happened and that there was a joint report put out? Now,
it wasn't Free Thought Blogs, Free Thought Project.
Free Thought Project. Yeah. So it was one of those things where it was like, something interesting to share with the viewers, but the response was a good one in terms of, yes, it's right. And it does open up a good question about what you put up there in terms of media ethics and what is appropriate.
So this is by Sam Levin. It's over at The Guardian. Guardian Media, fake news for liberals. Misinformation starts to lean left under Trump. The president's tumultuous first weeks in office could influence uptick in viral sharing of misleading articles and propaganda that stoke progressive anxieties. Again, we're not citing Breitbart. We're not citing the Daily Caller. We're not citing the National Review. We're talking The Guardian in media. And written by Sam Levin in San Francisco. I mean, I don't know. That's where Michael Savage is, so not everybody in San Francisco is a bleeding heart liberal. But.
No. Well, and I don't know why anyone would have any truck with the statement. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's because they may get offended to it, but the matter of fact is it's easier to write fake news about ridiculous things our president is saying because our president is saying ridiculous things. So naturally, yes, we're going to get more fake news coming from this angle because if you say the president proposed going to Nicaragua to kill all the drug dealers there, that's actually plausible. If 4 months ago, you would have laughed that off and said there's no way that happened. But today, if that happened, you'd have to go check it. Fair enough, right? You'd have to go check it because it could be possible that he said it. We're in a different the credibility of the office has diminished, therefore the fake news will rise.
Yeah, research has suggested that there was a huge volume of fake news across the political spectrum during the election, but that pro-Trump false stories were much more widespread than pro-Clinton ones. Media and communications experts suspect those dynamics could shift under Trump. That almost seems just like an obvious thing. And especially because of the emotion, because these things there's an involvement of emotion, passions, rights, things that are deeply rooted in people's personalities or in their identities. And so these things are it seems like a breeding ground that unless you're very vigilant, that when you're in that state, that it's much easier to read something. And even if it's just a headline, to read it and go, oh, my gosh, that ticks me off. Mm-hmm. And then to post something all sanctimoniously and fall prey to, because those are the same impulses that get those conservatives to do that.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, that headline! I'm going to share this.
But we can't stress enough. The reason why this is harder to do is because we don't have a credible person saying credible things at the head of our state. That matters for why it's easier to disseminate fake news. You really don't know what the hell this guy's going to say, and you don't know if what he's saying, really, that example I made up is a seriously plausible one. If you heard the president supports sending troops down to Nicaragua to kill drug dealers, to just wipe them out, that is not something that you would actually have to go look it up and see if that happened. I mean, and that's what I mean is it's on top of the fact that you have an emotional response to it. The biggest thing is the lack of credibility coming from our institutions of credibility. That's affecting fake news.
Brooke Binkowski, managing editor of the fact-checking site Snopes, said she'd seen a spike in the amount of popularity of fake news directed toward liberal audiences. On the left, there are numerous styles of misinformation that appear to be gaining traction. In addition to blatantly fabricated stories, there have been increasing concerns about articles featuring deceitful or hyperbolic headlines, viral memes that have a very tenuous connection to the truth, and poorly sourced articles that use inaccurate visuals to draw readers.
Yes.
And they list a couple of them. I mean, even ones of Standing Rock, and saying there's a lot of these stories about Standing Rock, but one, AlternativeMediaSyndicate.com, they said that officers had burned the camps of indigenous activists fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline, and that they destroyed their teepees. There was an image of multiple large teepees engulfed in flames. This was shared 270,000 times on Facebook. But the photo was from an HBO film in 2007. And on top of that, and this is maybe more importantly, a key premise of the story was fake.
Yeah. A huge premise. I mean, that's pretty much the entirety of that story is fake. I mean, not even pretty much. The entirety of that story is fake.
Same thing with countercurrentnews.com. There was an article that said falsely declared, quote, state gives cops the green light to shoot DAPL protesters on site.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing, that's shared like crazy. You have learnprogress.org said Melania Trump was selling jewelry on the White House website. There was a viral story of a boy handcuffed at an airport due to Trump's immigration ban. That photo was from 2015. And a Politicot, so it looks like Politico, .com story with a fabricated Mike Pence quote about abortion and rape.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have this stuff. It's the same game. It's not different. It's the same game that we were all decrying like a couple months ago.
Mm-hmm. It's the same. Yeah. It's the game on steroids.
Because now it's just kind of everybody.
Well, but it's and I'm sorry I'm tripling down on this. The biggest effect of this is the fact that we don't trust our institutions anymore. I'm not talking our media institutions. I'm talking about collaborative government institutions of any sort. Even that plays into it. But on top of it is we have a person who's led the country entirely on opinion. And is continuing to lead the country entirely on opinion. Facts be damned. And that is a breeding ground for all of this. Now, and again, the big point is, yes, conservatives and liberals, we're playing the same game. And it's going to be up to liberals to have to fact check more on this. That's absolutely true. But I can't state this enough. The idea is that Obama is going to come take everyone's guns is absolutely ludicrous. The idea that our president that's in the House right now wants to have a ban after an attack that might ban all people of one religious sect is plausible. That is a major shift in our society. That it's one that has to be noted.
They were Claire Wardle, a research director at First Draft News, said one of the problems adding to this is the social feeds, and you may as well say algorithm, right? Mm-hmm. If one of your peers sends something, you already trust them. So you're much less likely to be critical.
Interesting.
And that's an extension. That's an extension, I think, of when thought leaders, people, if you have a trusted institution or you have a personality, a thought leader that you trust, that you can share that person with psychologically far less criticism. right? Far less skepticism of the story and the trustworthiness of that particular story. The same thing with your friends. That your friends fall into that same kind of bias. It's a trustworthy person. This person's smart. They may have influenced your life, in fact, on some things. And so you share it. Well, they shared it. It must be true. And so that it kind of is feeding itself in a way.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing is, this is a very simple rule, is don't share anything you haven't read. I mean, for real. And I know everyone's like, oh, of course. Well, of course, then people wouldn't be doing that, but they do. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
A lot of us do.
Tons.
More than not.
Tons.
More than not, don't read more than maybe the first paragraph of it. Or they open it up and skim through it to find one thing they like of it, pull it off, quote it, and share it. Read it, and then you can know what's on it.
Phil Menser, a professor of informatics and computer science at Indiana University, said it means more polarization, more segregation, and stronger echo chambers. Bad place. Make sure to check your news and always listen to Paleo Radio. We'll be right back.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to the greatest show that's airing right now in the studio.
Yeah, as always.
Joe Elder, Jeremiah Bannister in Paleo Radio
and
here.
William Bello.
And William.
Yeah, William
Yes.
is my good friend. This goes back a long way, in fact. And he's called the show once before. But he goes back to Zanga. And I don't know if anybody really remembers Zanga too well.
Back
but
in
boy,
the
oh
day.
boy, that is old school. I think Zanga eventually turned into those really annoying like Farmville games and stuff. And I'm sorry if I've stepped on a whole bunch of toes with that.
Yes,
Boy, I
old
hate those
Farmville,
games.
man.
I do. I just Facebook games. Every time I get a request, I just grind my teeth, and I'm like, I can't. This is bad. I need to set my settings better.
They seem to be going away, at least somewhat. It's
Yeah,
fading,
I don't get as many
fading.
requests from stuff, and I'm like, and it's weird because the people who do the requests, I'll go to their walls, and I'm like, I wonder what they're doing. And you can scroll and scroll and scroll, and all it is are updates about those games. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, oh man, no.
People love
don't want it. Don't want it. I like that my Facebook page looks like a magazine, basically. It looks like a tablet.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's the
all
way to do it.
diversified.
That's nice. So, hey, we want to talk about gay marriage.
Yes.
Want to talk about how most Americans don't support religious liberty rights for Christian business owners. And this is a poll that's by Samuel Smith, and this is from the Christian Post.
Which explains the framing of that headline, by the way. This is a
Exactly.
little media theory.
It is.
Most Americans don't support religious liberty rights. Think about that. The
Yeah.
way that that's framed.
Yes.
That they don't support religious liberty rights for Christian business owners. They don't. It's not for anybody. It's for Christian business owners.
Yes.
What's
yeah.
hilarious about this, and we'll talk about this, but not only it's one specific brand of defining religious liberty. That's number one. There's a lot of people who believe in religious liberty, but not as it's framed by the Christian Post. And secondly, there's a lot of Christian business owners. In fact, the majority of people who identify as Christians think that this is the way it should be, right?
Yes.
So this person is kind of like, well, maybe they're not real Christians. It kind of turns
No
into
true
this
Scotsman
true
argument.
Scotsman nonsense.
As
Yeah.
it always does whenever people disagree within
But maybe
the religious
Samuel
faction.
Smith didn't write it. Maybe I don't want to blame him. Whoever wrote the headline for the Christian Post, seriously, you suck at your job.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so into the article, the majority of Americans who identify as religious say they favor allowing gays and lesbians to legally marry and oppose policies that would give business owners the right to refuse services to same-sex wedding ceremonies, according to data compiled by the Public Religion Research Institute. So that's good news. Last Friday, the Washington, D.C.-based polling firm released a news analysis drawn from the interviews with about almost 41,000 Americans throughout 2016 for PRRI's American Values Atlas. Mm-hmm. The data, which has an error margin of less than 1 percentage point, finds that the majority of only 3 religious demographics, white evangelical Protestants, Mormons, and Jehovah's Witnesses, say they oppose, quote, allowing gays and lesbians to marry legally. Mm-hmm. So there's just a trove of data here.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it, again, point that out. Evangelical Protestants, okay, got white evangelical Protestants. Let me take this back. Mormons, okay, so more white people. And Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses, that's a rather diverse group, in fact. Yeah, there's a lot of diversity in Jehovah's Witnesses. But those groups are the only one where the majority of the demographic says that they're opposed to allowing gays and lesbians the right to marry. 58% of Americans said they support same-sex marriage. 61% of white evangelical Protestants oppose it, as did 55% of Mormons and 53% of Jehovah's Witnesses. They signaled that they oppose the legalization of same-sex marriage, which happened in 2015. 46% of Hispanic Protestants also oppose, 41 favor. So a majority of those with a position that are Hispanic Protestants also disagree with it. But you've got, altogether, only 28% of white mainline Protestants and white Catholics are against it. So the overwhelming majority of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, 72% say yes. So 72% of white mainline Protestants and white Catholics say no, or 72% would say that they support. Of Hispanic Catholics, 75% would support.
Yeah.
Of Orthodox Christians, and this kind of goes out maybe to my sister, Orthodox Christians, 70% support.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, did they say, hey, they have a right?
That's a high number.
It's a very high number. And some of it, I mean, look, some of it comes from their theology, in fact, that says, I mean, look, Catholics no longer believe much in Catholic states anymore. Very public space type stuff. Very pluralistic. Even their leaders are praying with voodoo doctors and stuff. And so you've got a very interfaithy thing going on, a public space kind of thing going on with them. White mainline Protestants, these have been part of the social gospel thing for a long time. This kind of almost a civil religion, kind of, you know, that I don't want to castigate them too far. I don't want to say that that's all it is, but that they're far more. Their message it seems to work with that far better than your messages that come from, let's say, Pentecostal churches.
Yeah,
you know, or your more hardline churches that their worldview doesn't leave as much room for public space where unbelievers and believers just kind of work together in harmony, as much as this idea that whether it's dominion. You know, whether it's this evangelical thing that even if it's not aiming for dominion exclusively, it's definitely aiming in evangelizing a lot to kind of get there to that place. So the groups that aren't so concerned with that don't seem so concerned with gay marriage.
That's right. There's also, it says Jews were predominantly in favor of allowing gays and lesbians to marry. 73% of Jewish respondents said they would favor the right, as were 94% of Unitarian Universalists. So that's very high.
Yeah, 94%.
85% of Buddhists, 78% of the religiously unaffiliated, and 67% of Hindus.
And let me clarify. I was playing badly off of some numbers, just kind of saying, well, if you're not against it, you're for it. Not leaving room for those without an opinion. 63% of white mainline Protestants and white Catholics say yes. 62% of Hispanic Catholics. 59% of Orthodox Christians. So you still have that in between. But look, 63, 62, 59. I mean, come on, there it is.
More in the Muslim community here in America, 44% favor the right, 41% do not.
That's actually a really interesting statistic, you know, because a lot of times people, when talking about the issue of marriage or talking about cakes and stuff like that, they'll say things like, well, what about the Muslims? You know, and you're like, well, here you got Muslims where 44% of them say, well, yeah, I'm okay with that. 41% say that they're not okay with that. I don't know if I would have predicted that rightly, and that's something I need to reflect on. In fact,
I would be interested to see how many people that own, say, a Muslim cake shop would refuse making a gay cake.
I know I saw ones
cake.
where they refused to do ones that were anti-Islam, but I'm like, that's not the same thing.
That's right.
That's not the same thing as saying, yeah, hey, make me a cake that is ripping on Christianity.
Well, because that's slander. But people that are going in for a wedding cake aren't being slanderous.
I wonder if there was a video, though, about a gay wedding cake at a Muslim baker.
Yeah, maybe so. And the reason why I'm asking, too, is, you know, I'm not saying every person that's here in the United States, but there's got to be, I believe that there's something to the fact that most people, if they are from first or second generation, really adhere to the quality of open business practices in America and the idea that everybody gets served equally, and that's a big selling point to why they came here. A lot of them also are very quick to recognize, because they lived in different situations that involved a theocracy, they're very quick to note when the government should be staying out of issues with business sales or when they should be getting involved. Basically saying that most people have a good understanding if they're first or second generation immigrants to the country. Most people have a good understanding of how that works in the business setting. They're more akin to sell the cake.
Mark Tooley, president of the D.C.-based think tank Institute on Religion and Democracy, he chalks this up. Many Americans in religious traditions that affirm only the union of man and woman as marriage have accepted legalized same-sex marriage. They've acceded to the largely secular notion that societal and legal affirmation of a sexual and domestic arrangement is an intrinsic human right. In other words, they don't see rights as God things. Mm-hmm. They're not very informed, even by their religious institutions, about why nearly all of humanity has privileged male-female marriage to the exclusion of other sexual arrangements. They might answer differently if they better understood that male-female marriage best protects children, protects families, protects women and men, and ideally places prudent boundaries on sexuality. And here's the thing. I mean, that's a good pitch, but that's been the pitch now for a long time, and I think people know it real well. Like, if there's been anything that conservative churches have done really well about, it seems to be perpetuating this exact thing and saying this is the core of our sexual ethic. Here's the core of our societal framework. Here's the way that we portray people who are gay and how they are placed within the narrative of our God and our history. And people just simply don't buy that.
Yeah.
They just say, well, we have studies that demonstrate that people do actually quite well in homes that have two men or two women. And maybe more importantly, that it seems really weird that they target this group, and that is what happens when you target this group by saying, hey, man, it doesn't really protect children, protect families. But you don't have a rule that says that husband and wives that get married and have children, that there's an expectation on them as to whether or not they can even get married yet based on their responsibility at all.
There is none.
There's none. Nobody goes, well, people can say Jimmy and Sally aren't ready to get married, but there's no law that prohibits Jimmy and Sally from getting married at 18 years old. They could be the worst.
You just have one chance at the wedding to stand up. That's it.
Yeah.
You say your piece. That's about it.
Say your piece, and that's it. But there's no rule about that. So all the data could show there's a lot of really bad parenting situations with straight people. But it would be crazy to go, well, we're going to have a requirement that before you can get married at all, we're going to make sure that you're going to be good parents. That's just absurd.
Yeah. Well, have a parenting law, basically. And that's an interesting point that you raise, is exactly right. Basically, you can go in there with your anatomy if you're a man and a woman, and that's going to be good enough. But if it's a man and a man or a woman and a woman, now we have to talk about the moral ethics of it and how you're going to treat the children. And that is an interesting take on that, where that litmus test does not exist for straight couples.
And when they talk about perpetuating, and they say, well, only straight people can just naturally advance the race, and you say, okay, that might make sense if you had a law that said that you have to be fertile. But there is no law that says, is Sally fertile?
Are people really getting married just to have kids? I mean, please don't kill my thought of the institution of marriage to say that the only reason it exists is to produce children. It's got some faulty ground.
The last thing I'll say, Tooley says, a more even-handed question would have asked if businesses and persons must, by law, be compelled to actively participate in specific ceremonies and events that violate conscience. Debate it, 616-656-1680.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
Absolutely love this intro music, probably my favorite. When we cycle through, and it's going to happen, we're going to have a different intro eventually, we're going to have different bumpers eventually. It's overdue. But boy, I'm going to miss this one.
Yeah, this is the Funky Doodle.
It's the Funky Doodle. You know, Funky Doodle, we had some really cool Funky Doodles that have never made it.
We do.
Yeah.
We have some of our own creations on there too.
And we've played one. It's been one time. And remember that where when we made the switch and they wanted our bumpers here at the station, we were having trouble with one of them. And we had trouble with recording here, and we had to do the editing at the house in the studio.
Yes.
So I went back, but there was no sound over one part. There was no music. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so I said, well, I'm going to put in this thing that Joe and I made, where we're playing guitar together and we're at the house and it's this kind of raw audio of the two of us playing. So we'll have more of that. It's going to be a bunch of fun.
It will be great.
Make sure to subscribe to us, of course, on Spreaker, as well as on iTunes. But before we go, because we've only got, 11 minutes left, bumming me out. But there's an article, I think you shared this with me, by Molly Ball over at The Atlantic, and it's called, Is the Anti-Trump Resistance the New Tea Party? 8 years ago, a new president took office who scared the living daylights out of thousands of people who'd never been politically active before. Sound familiar? Today, a new movement, loosely dubbed the Resistance, has suddenly arisen in visceral reaction to Donald Trump's election as president, with thousands taking to the streets. For those who remember the Tea Party, it feels kind of like deja vu, and some of the parallels are striking. A massive grassroots movement, many of its members new to activism, that feeds primarily off of fear and reaction. Misunderstood by the media and both parties, it wreaks havoc on its ostensible allies, even as it re-energizes their moribund political prospects. They can ride the wave, but they cannot control it. And they are often at the mercy of its most unreasonable fringe.
I agree with that.
Yes.
I agree with that because usually when there is more fear and reaction and it's just a kickback, you're going to have the people that are more to the fringe guiding a lot of the narratives. And I think we're seeing that right now. I mean, for instance, the whole punch Nazis conversation we've been having the past 2 weeks, right? This is people in the liberal community having a serious conversation about if they should. It's them having a serious conversation about if they should actually instill violence into their political agendas, which I don't agree with. But I mean that gives you an idea of where the fringe could be.
The person who's calling, if it goes to voicemail, please call back. We have my wife. She's normally in the call center. She's had to go. She has her own business, and so she went and did that. So one of us is going to have to go and grab that phone. But I was thinking, Senator Bob Bennett, right? Senator Bob Bennett, and I'll tell the story here. A ranking member of the Senate Rules Committee, right? He was. It was his job to swear in the VP. He was criticized, and I remember this, man. He was criticized for looking peaceful. And this is the article, looking happy. His son said that Bob believed that a peaceful transfer of power transcended party. But his colleagues who played on the optics of this saw it as complicity.
Oh, yeah.
I remember. What about the hug?
Oh, yeah.
Governor Christie.
Remember Christie's
that?
hug. Oh, I do.
Yeah. And so this kind of thing, and they saw it as complicity. Obama and the Democrats had won the 2008 election so convincingly that many were convinced the Republican Party was pretty much over. And listen,
what a joke.
That's like, what's his name?
That's William Buckley.
That's William Buckley Jr. The Democratic Party is dead.
That's like after, I don't remember what year it was, but they had a Republican swing and they won, and he was asking if liberalism was dead in the 70s. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just quit joking.
Yeah, liberalism's over. The Democratic Party's done.
Yes.
Kind of stuff. But then something started to happen. Scattered local protests sprung up in January 2009, just days after Obama was inaugurated. Then in February, the CNBC reporter Rick Santinelli's call for a Tea Party gave the movement a viral moment and a name. 8 days later, coordinated protests unfolded in 40 cities. Many participants told reporters they'd never been politically active before, but they were alarmed by what was happening in Washington and felt they had to speak out. Fox News covered the protest to a degree that sometimes seemed like cheerleading. One of its hosts, Glenn Beck, was particularly enthusiastic. The administration, in response, singled out the network and accused it of abandoning journalistic values.
Yes.
And I'm seeing this, like I saw, it was a post asking if Rachel Maddow is the new Glenn Beck and how she's kind of doing this, but not for the Tea Party, but for the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And is she falling into this? I did that kind of thing with Occupy when I first started reporting.
Yeah.
I did. I felt for this. And as somebody, rather than simply being a detached person, instead I was romantic about it. It was a romanticized concept for a quick second. Mm-hmm. And so I felt that later on in review that it really affected me as a reporter. And I've made an intentional effort to simply, I don't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. But this is the way it played out with the Tea Party. And I think that it's not exact. I'm not meaning to conflate the two things. One, opposition to Obama because they're afraid he's a Muslim born in another country, in part. And another one, that it has fears about Donald Trump that are far more realistic than that. Mm-hmm. So there's no conflation of this, but to say that the similarities here and the way that the thought leaders and even institutions are responding to this and focusing on it and playing into the narrative, that those are striking similarities.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities between the two, especially with how people are reacting to it. But I think that it's a natural response that with how unhappy people have been. If we go before the Tea Party, people have been talking about how there's going to be a break in the Democratic and Republican parties for a long, long time, and they were saying how people were getting so absolutely sick of it. Now, what it took for the right to actually jolt into that splintering was someone that they actually believed was going to be a Muslim from Kenya coming to take over the country and instill socialist world domineering power and Agenda 21, whatever else they believed happened. But the point is, that's what it took to jolt them. What it took to jolt the left base to break up from the Democratic Party is Donald Trump. So I think we're seeing a lot of things. You and I were talking about this over the weekend, that it could be argued, and we have yet to see, but it could be argued that Donald Trump may be the best thing for liberalism in the last decade.
In the long game.
In the long game.
Right.
Yep. He very well could be. He could also be the man who saves globalism for the world, because populist candidates' numbers are falling like rocks right now in Europe in comparison to his election. So it is to say that it may not be that people are going to follow in America's footsteps. They may actually just learn from a mistake.
Yeah, I'm not, of course, so optimistic about the resurgence of globalism. But Bennett, talking about Bennett, that guy, the senator, Bennett's approval rating suddenly tanked in his home state. Throughout his career, he'd been rated one of the Senate's most conservative members, but now his opponents argued he wasn't conservative enough. One of the several Tea Partiers challenging him and winning was political newcomer Mike Lee. And Mike Lee called himself a constitutional conservative. It was Obama's election that had brought the masses out into the streets, and they were willing to believe almost anything that confirmed their worst fears about the president. That, right there, that line, is what gets me about what I'm seeing on the left. From a lot of my friends who are just very reasonable people that I ordinarily would say that they're very good about reserving their passions, curbing their enthusiasms. And in doing that, it's a more rigorous process for what they think is true or what they accept as worthy to share. That's out the window right now. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing not everybody, not all the time, but a disproportionate amount of shares, it seems.
Yes.
And stories are in this way, that they are reactionary and that they're emotional. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that they are reactionary. I think they are emotional. I think it's not going to stop. I think our administration is reactionary and emotional. I think they generate it. I'm serious. I don't think this is being generated by our populace. It's being generated by a very disorganized and not very clear-cut administration as well. Like, you have to look at this is when we look at things based in reason. Is it based in reason to think Obama was a Muslim from Kenya? No. Is it based in reason to think that Donald Trump has isolationist policies and refuses to apologize for anything ever under any circumstance?
No.
And so that is a key player in comparing these two and saying that it is an apples to oranges comparison in terms of how someone holds the office, and not liberal or Democrat, just generally how a president acts in office. President Obama wasn't acting different, but being treated different. President Trump is acting quite different than other presidents.
And I would say that it has more to do with this part too. For me, when it says viral rumors that flatter people's worst assumptions catch fire with a credulous audience before they can be debunked and persist long afterward. Take this, for example. Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders, previously considered pretty left-wing, have been attacked for suggesting they could work with Trump. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer drew left-wing protesters at his office in Brooklyn. When Delaware Senator Tom Carper hugged Trump's Attorney General nominee Jeff Sessions after voting against him, anti-Trumpers demanded a primary challenge.
Yes,
that is the when people talk, and you say going and protesting in front of Nancy Pelosi or Sanders when they said on some things like, for example, what infrastructure bills or negotiating Medicare prescription drug policies. Right, or more protectionist trade policy, which they support. I mean, that's what they want. That for them to say, well, on those things we can work, and people go, you're negotiating with a terrorist, and I'm like it didn't work good for Bush. In principle, it didn't. And if we can negotiate with terrorists, then we should be able to negotiate with Donald Trump.
I agree with that. One thing I will say, though, too, and this is for another discussion, I do not believe Democrats should approve any Supreme Court nominee that they pick, period, unless his name is Merrick Garland. Because that pick was stolen, flat out stolen by Republicans. Yeah. And if you don't want to play the game, then we won't play the game.
Speaking of the game is over for today, Joe.
It is over for the day.
Yeah.
But there will be much, much more next week. Thank you guys very much for listening. You can always listen to us or tune in on our social media at Facebook or Twitter at PaleoRadio Show.
Yep, and of course, follow us on iTunes and Spreaker. We love every one of you. Make sure to support the show financially at Patreon, and we'll see you next Monday.